We are live here. We're at Build 2015 edition. I'm pretty excited to be here with Eric and Chris, right?
Right.
How you guys doing?
Great.
Pretty good.
So there was an interesting announcement today that you guys had a little bit of work on. Can you tell us what that is? I was pretty excited when I watched Hanselman say, hey, maybe we should use Visual Studio somewhere else. What have you guys been working on? How did it come about?
Well, I've been working on what has become Visual Studio Code, which is an editor which provides you a rich coding experience, and which runs cross-platform. So you can code wherever you are with the technologies you want, right?
So how is this built? I was interested because when I saw it, I thought, boy, this looks similar to some other things. How is it built?
So we didn't start from scratch. So first of all, there is a history, right? We worked on HTML5 based tooling and editing experience since kind of 4 years. We started with online tools, like the one which was available on Azure since a while, which is Visual Studio Online Monaco, which allows you to edit websites kind of in the browser. And this has matured over time, and we basically are using this technology from Visual Studio Online Monaco, the editor. And for Visual Studio Code, we're also leveraging this runtime infrastructure to run HTML5, Node, and JavaScript as a desktop application, which is kind of this Electron, which was known as Atom Shell from GitHub, which gives us the runtime infrastructure. We put our editor on top, and then of course we also made it work together, and we came out with quite a different architecture for integrating other languages than just webby languages like C#, right?
Right. So this is go ahead, sorry.
I think the history of the editor is quite interesting as well. Actually, the HTML and JavaScript-based editor was the first thing that the team produced. And the first deliverables for that editor were in things like OneDrive or Azure or Visual Studio Online.
Don't forget the F12 tools.
But the editor also ships in the F12 tools. So when you bring up the F12 tools for Internet Explorer, that is the what we call the Monaco editor. That's the core of Visual Studio Code. So it's, over the past 4 years it's been in development. It's been battle tested, and performance was great, and handled very long lines.
We are we say we are aggressive dog fooders, right? Yeah. So when we started development, I think after 3 months or 4 months, we started doing all our development using our own editor. It was painful in the beginning, but this has continued.
It's good to have pain when you're building the thing that's giving you pain.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That's cool. And so it seems like you had all of this investment into Monaco, and you thought, well, let's go level 2 and just make it an application that you can run anywhere.
Well, that's an interesting story. We still have today on Azure websites. We have Monaco hosted in the browser.
Right.
And it's actually quite a successful tool. There's like 3,000 people that use it every month for whatever lightweight editing that they want to do. One of the challenges with hosted tools is the fact that developers have a whole toolbox full of things that they use day in and day out.
Right.
And it's very difficult to take all those tools and bring them up to the cloud, right? And so we looked at, how can we make the environment that we run in the cloud more robust, and we also looked at, should we then go instead cross-platform and bring it to more and more machines? And so when we had the opportunity to take the technology that's running up in the cloud and bring it cross-platform, we get the benefits of the sort of lightweight tooling environment, easy access from anywhere, but it runs locally on your machine, so that it integrates with the rest of the tools in your tool chain.
Yeah, and that's a pretty cool sort of, I really like the idea of doing that. Now, is it written in pure JavaScript?
No, actually, no, we started 4 years ago. We started with JavaScript, and at the same time, TypeScript emerged. So we're one of the first early adopters of TypeScript, and we started gradually adopting it more, and now it's all TypeScript, the UI. Right, the architecture is now a multi-process architecture because you also want to support C#. Right. And for C#, Microsoft has this nice Roslyn infrastructure, which you don't want to rewrite in JavaScript.
No, you don't.
So the way we leverage that is by run Roslyn in a separate process, and then talking through it through a simple protocol. Right? And
that's
clever.
In
fact, now there was an open source project who has already started doing that, which was called OmniSharp. And we have joined this effort. So some of my team members, actually, they are committers or they come with this open source project. And so the nice thing is, when it comes to language services, you can write them in the language you want, right? If you want to do a Python service, you can write the brain of the service in Python, and we talk through a protocol from our IDE written in JavaScript to this service, right?
Is there a way to sort of build those plugins in, or is that something we have to wait for your team to build in?
So we work on an extensibility infrastructure, but we decided it's not mature yet, not ready yet, right? And we take that serious. Now, when it comes to APIs and things like that, so you don't want to break. Once you have opened the door, right, you cannot just change the furniture, everything, right? So that's why we said for the preview that we made available today, there is no extension infrastructure.
Okay.
So we, behind the scenes, people will see there is a plugin folder and stuff like that, but we don't. It's not public, right? So
I see.
I think the other nice aspect of the architecture is that if you want to extend it, with another language service that runs out of process, it's not like you have to fit into the mold that we've defined. You can write it in your language the way that you want to write it, and then all we ask is, the protocol is matched. So you can use your tool, use whatever it is you want. You don't have to get a framework and say, this is the box that you have to live in. You can work the way that you want to work and produce it the way you want it to work, or the way that you want to, but it'll still integrate with the tool.
I think the cool thing is that since it's written JavaScript, JavaScript is such a forgiving language when it comes to doing stuff.
Is that good or bad?
I don't know. I have my own opinion about that. I'm glad TypeScript comes around to sort of solidify things around. All right, we have some questions coming in. Are there any plans to ship the entire VS to OS X and Linux? I think this question sort of is directed to the fact that Visual Studio Code is not like Visual Studio.
It is not Visual Studio.
Yeah.
No, there's no plans. The porting effort of Visual Studio to Linux or the Mac, it's not even clear that you could do it. Visual Studio is a great example of all the technologies that we shipped over the years. It uses a whole ton of different things. But really what we want to do is think about taking what we can and what we call them, the key features of Visual Studio and bringing them cross-platform. So you get the great IntelliSense experience, the coding experience powered by Roslyn. You get a great debugging experience powered by the debugging engine of Visual Studio itself. And so we'll bring over the key pieces that make sense to bring over and produce the tool in that fashion. Instead of saying, hey, we're going to go port this thing, and 10 years later we would have a port where we would...
So it's not the intent that Visual Studio Code is full Visual Studio. That's not the intent at all. What's the intent?
On the spectrum, right? If you have a spectrum from editors on that side that knows how to deal with text, and IDE that gives you all kind of visual services, we want to be closer to the editor, right? But we want to add the things which that you need for development to make you productive. Like that's why we say debugging, we'd like to have in there, right? And whenever we do that, we like to, as Chris said, look into can we share code with Visual Studio. Like Roslyn is a good example. Debugging will also something where we can share code, and this will happen more and more over time. So it's not the whole Visual Studio, but some guts from Visual Studio we want to definitely share across in the family, right? We want to be a good family member and share lots of the assets from the household.
So if you were to say, okay, Visual Studio Code is an editor plus, what would be the pluses that we're adding to just a standard editor?
I would say two things, right? Rich language services. And debugging, and good Git integration, source control integration.
Okay.
What makes this inner loop, right? We call this inner loop. What do you do when you code, right? What do you do? You make a mistake, you want to debug. You check in your code, before you check them in, you want to look at what you changed, right? So these inner loop activities, we want to have in there, but not much more.
Okay, so there's a very clear vision on what's going to be in there and what's not because of that loop.
The core edit, compile, debug loop. Right. We want that to be in there. And if there are things that you need to do outside of that, then we should integrate well with other tools, either through working with a file system or through
command line, right?
Through the command line, or standard out. Those ways to integrate with other tools, but not try to put everything inside it.
I like that there's a specific vision, so that if someone comes in and says, well, why can't I do X? Well, this is not what this is for.
Right.
It's good to have an answer like that. All right, let's look at some more questions. Will this editor replace PowerShell ISE?
So the goal is like any good editor today supports many languages,
Right.
but with different level of depth, right? So today we support PowerShell at the syntax coloring level, which is the basic level only. And if you look at IC, right, it gives you IntelliSense and things like that, which we don't yet do. But I think over time, we want to get as many languages as possible to the happy level of IntelliSense, find all references, refactoring, right?
Anything that gets you in that development loop.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it's for us a time thing, right? Right now we distinguish 3 levels, right? Basic coloring, syntax coloring, bracket matching, auto-indenting. That's the lowest level, which is support for many languages, which you make very easy to do. And the level 2 is when it becomes harder. It's IntelliSense,
Right.
like go to definition. And level 3 is really kind of refactorings. And right now we have only C# and TypeScript at level 3, and JavaScript, HTML, CSS, less, they are at the level 2. We give you IntelliSense, so we have an AST behind the scenes to understand the code more than text, right? That's why it's called code, right?
Right.
We want to understand your code. Yeah.
That's cool. And so, but eventually, we're going to have a system where if you have language foo and you want to make sure you have support for language foo, that's something that we'll be able to add ourselves, or that's something we have to ask the team?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
No, we will work on extension architecture. Adding your new language is definitely one of the interesting scenarios, right?
Got it.
Yeah.
All right, question here. Will it be ported to mobile platforms such as Android, iOS, and the Windows Phone? That's an interesting question because since it's written on JavaScript,
You can run Visual Studio Online Monaco on these devices, right? We demoed that even, right? That we did on an Android tablet, we did editing. So there are scenarios where this makes sense, but for what we have in mind with code, which is kind of 7x24 coding, right? It's not the top scenario that
Right,
we have on our
like
radar.
we talked about earlier, where we're trying to integrate with this tool chain. Probably don't have that tool chain on your phone, right? And so that makes it less of an interesting scenario at that point.
got it. All right, next question. What are the dependencies to run Visual Studio Code on Linux?
So today, depending on what it is that you want to do, right? So right straight, if we call it out of the box, on Linux, you don't have any dependencies. If you want to do node development or node debugging, or you want to do ASP.NET development, today you need to have Mono 4.0.1 installed on the Linux box. And on the site and on the ASP.NET site, there's a very simple set of scripts that you can run to get that all installed onto your Linux machine.
Got it. And so, the next question is, what about rich F# support? I think that goes a little bit towards what we were talking about.
With these 3 levels, right? Right now, F# support is at the lowest level, which is coloring, syntax level, but no deeper language understanding. So we can't wait till we open the door for extensibility, and then of course people can add that and can help us to go one level up.
Got it. Next, are you going to integrate C++ and IntelliSense into VS Code? That's an interesting question, because Roslyn, does it work in the C++ area?
No, Roslyn is a managed code Visual VB
Right.
and C#. So it's interesting, right? For C#, for C++, there is one of these language engines similar to Roslyn called Clang.
Oh, that's right.
And of course, it would be a nice scenario to use Clang as this out-of-process server that talks to our protocol, and that's how you get that. But again, I guess we have to make first this extension story available that we can invite others to help us on that.
Got it.
But the architecture definitely goes in this direction, right? You want to leverage these language engines, and for C++, there is a good one out there. So.
Okay. The next question, can this compile the app's add reference? I download and try to compile my store app. That's a good question. Is there like can you compile, is there certain kind of apps that you're like, you shouldn't really be working on inside of Visual Studio Code? Or is it really just an editor? What's the loop look like for someone that's doing, for example, store apps?
So for apps like this, Visual Studio can create an enormous number of different types of projects with an enormous number of different dependencies on things that only run and install on Windows itself. So it's challenging to say, you could open up any project in Visual Studio Code on Linux or on the Mac, because there's a lot of fundamental pieces that aren't there. So what we have today is support for ASP.NET V5 applications from a managed code perspective, and we have support for sort of core mono-based C# applications, and that's the scope of what we support today for managed code cross-platform.
I see. Well, that's interesting. I mean, it's good to know the boundary, right?
Yeah. On Windows, Visual Studio Code runs cross-platform and also runs on Windows, and if you've got Store app and you've got all the tools installed in Visual Studio, you can certainly go to the console on Windows and run MS Build and build your application and do all that. But you're not going to get built-in support in the code environment for those project types.
Yeah, I guess it's good to know what it's for and what it isn't. That's good. Good demarcation. A question from Al: will you support SLN and CS projects?
So this actually, the whole brain for C# is OmniSharp, and OmniSharp today supports solution and CS proj files in a somewhat constrained way because the solution and project systems are open-ended, right? So we cannot support them all. But there are scenarios, so you can open a solution file which only references CS proj files, and if there are not too many customizations, OmniSharp can handle it.
Got it.
But not for the fully channeled
scenario, I think, to go back to your point, like if you want to be very clear what is supported and what isn't supported, ASP.NET V5 projects are supported.
Fully?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
And then folder-based, HTML, JavaScript, Node-based applications where there is no project system that's involved. I guess we'd also say TypeScript project. TypeScript has a tsconfig file, which is kind of like a project descriptor, and we support that as well.
Okay.
But for managed code, it's ASP.NET V5.
But the newest version.
Yes.
Got it.
Yep.
All right, question from Robert. When will there be ECMAScript 6 language and TypeScript debugging support?
So TypeScript debugging support was that close to make it for the preview. Basically it means you have to support source maps.
Right.
And we had some glitches there. We were very close, so we will make this mature and then we make it available in one of our next iterations. See, our plan is we work internally in short sprints, 3-week sprints, and we plan to also continue that and make new stuff available in this rhythm, right? So I think this will be one of the next sprints that we can make this available.
All right, this is an interesting question, one that was asked earlier, and I wanted to see your take on it. Will Visual Studio Code be open sourced?
See, my answer is some of it is already open source, right? We use OmniShop, which is open source, which uses Roslyn, which is open source. We use the TypeScript service, which is open source. So we build on many things which we actually also contribute to. Now the UI, the Monaco editor and things like that, that's what we will discuss in the next month. What makes sense to open source, how we can contribute back to the community. But these are discussions we're having, right? So
the guts is already pretty much open source. You sort of grabbed all of these pieces and then built a UI over the top.
Right, and also we use open source underneath us, right? There is also this Electron framework from GitHub that allows you to use Node and HTML5. That's already what we use and also what we contribute, pull requests, how you do it as a good open source citizens these days, right?
That's really cool.
So, but we also want to evolve the architecture, right? And we want to evolve what's the extensibility story. And once we have that, then I think it makes sense to have a discussion what makes sense to open source and what not.
Because it's still in preview mode and there's still some baking that needs to happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. All right, from Wesley, are there plans for ES6JS support? We already asked it. There's a flag for the JS version target, but it looks like it only supports ES3 and ES5. I think we already talked about that.
Right.
We're this close, right?
Yeah, it is close.
All right, Daniel, are you planning to support a wider range of programming language in terms of highlighting and syntax checking? Can you give us a reminder of the 3 levels again for those that maybe are just tuning in?
Right, so the base level is, right, you get coloring, you know the brackets, and you get bracket matching, auto-indenting. That's the one which we have a broad spectrum. What is it, 30 languages?
At least 30, yeah.
30 languages. And we also leverage, again, open source technology for that. Like we can consume TextMate bundles to color your languages, which we tap in this community. And then the level above is really kind of, you need an AST to give you IntelliSense and go to definition and understand multi-files, right? You have to go understanding more than one file, then you can get to that one. And that's level 2, and the top level is then refactoring. So the nirvana is all languages are at level 3, but I think this will take time.
And you just got to build them up as you go. So what are the level 3 languages that are in there already?
TypeScript and C#.
Got it. Mark, is there is there any plan for C++ support for Linux, IntelliSense and code, maybe debugging with Clang? We did talk about that.
Right.
It's
yeah.
definitely a possibility and something that you're looking
See,
at.
what's interesting in our language protocol, if you look at the protocol itself, it's not very language specific, right? If you consider IntelliSense, all it needs to know at this text position, I need back a list of proposal, right?
Yeah.
And at the protocol level, it's almost language neutral. And of course, the language server has all the brain to actually do the computation, but the protocol is fairly language.
Yeah, it's just returning lists of things.
Exactly. So, and that's why we hope this should happen at some point once you have the extension story ready.
Got it. Is TFS support upcoming?
Well, so basic level today, of course, we support Git source code control, so you can push and pull to Git to Visual Studio Online. I guess the question is TFS or TFS Visual Studio Online?
Yeah, that's a good question.
TFS, the
I think
source
that's
code
source
repository.
control.
Source
Okay.
control.
It is on our backlog, but we went with Git first. We think about building ASP.NET web applications cross-platform. Git was the popular source code control system that we wanted to support first. So,
but also, TFS supports the command line, and code is open to the command line, so you can use the command line to do your TFS source code operations. You don't get the nice diffing in the tool as we do for Git today. Yeah.
Is there going to be, because we talked a lot about extensions in the future for language support to get languages up to level 3, is there going to be extensibility on the providers for source control?
We already have this as feature request, right? They want a Mercurial, they want to have others, right? So I think this is part of the extension story. Not sure where it is. I think language extension is more important. We have to see on the backlog which APIs you want to do.
So for Michael, does VS Code support NuGet packages? I think we're getting to like a common, like, does it do this, does it do that? The answer is almost invariably yes if you can do it in the command line.
yes, and that's how it works today. So if you're using ASP.NET v5, everything comes down as NuGet packages, and so from the tool we can read in the commands for ASP.NET v5. Plus we also have .NET Update, DNU, Restore, which will go and pull down all of the packages from NuGet. There's nothing in the tool itself that lists out all the packages, and we don't think that we should put that in the tool. It's a good command line tool. We do in project.json, which is kind of the project container file for ASP.NET v5 applications. There's a list of dependencies that are in there of all the assemblies that you consume in your app, and we have a great IntelliSense experience for that. It's the first control space, and we'll go query the NuGet repository. We'll list you everything, version numbers and all that, and we'll prompt you to go and restore all those packages. So in that core sort of edit compile loop, we let you go in and pull down the right packages and kick off the restore and go from there.
Yeah, so it sounds like if you're targeting, like, we're building ASP.NET 5, right? Is that what MVC 5 application from ASP.NET? Totally, we're in there, and I think it's because if you're making it work on several different platforms, you need to have sort of an environment that supports those platforms. That's why you got to use Mono in some cases on the other one.
Yep.
All right, so Stelios, will there be a clearer path that will let third-party tools into integrations into Visual Studio Code?
That's the extension story, right, that we're working on, right? Yeah. Over the summer, that's a big backlog item.
All right, so here's a long one. From Linux or HPUX, is it possible to commit code to VSO from Visual Studio Code? Can you connect it to VSO, or should we use other tools to clone Git repositories?
So, first of all, no, our code right now for Visual Studio Code is hosted in VSO, and we have team members that work from Linux, that work from Mac, and they all commit to our repository. So yes, you can do that. Of course, we don't support the connect experience, so you clone it, and then once you have cloned it, you work with your code, and you can push through Visual Studio Code, see diffs inside Visual Studio Code. That's our day-to-day work, actually. Yeah.
Got it. Will it work with Unity, replacing their Mono-based IDE?
The Unity guys would know that, right?
Yeah.
It seems like if you're just editing the file, it should work. And if it's C# and you need language services, if it can ping Roslyn, it should work?
It's the project metadata is then the challenge, right? We need to know a little bit more about how you build your sources. That's why we fully support the ASP.NET Next project.json metadata file, and we support a subset of solution and CS project files.
In the end, if you were just looking for a really good code text editor with syntax highlighting, we have support for 30 or so languages.
Yeah.
And if you're just editing text, it's going to be great.
Yep.
Okay.
Plus you have Git integration, right? If you edit code and you want to check it in, the Git integration will help you.
Perfect. What's the difference between this and OmniSharp? Now, this is going to bring into relief a little bit more what you've actually done with this.
Right. So as I said, OmniSharp is kind of the language server that our UI talks to. So it's a part of it, right? So it's, when it comes to C# support, OmniSharp is the engine, the brain that gives us the intelligence to give you IntelliSense for C# code.
So it's actually part of the
It's
product.
part of the product.
It
Yeah, we
consumes,
ship
so Visual Studio Code consumes OmniSharp, which in turn consumes Roslyn.
I see.
So we're using it.
Okay, perfect. Are there any plans for, we talked about that. Yes, I think there's plugin supports going, thought about it. There's thoughts on that going forward. Can Visual Studio Code be used with the same mono installed with Xamarin on Mac?
This depends which version that.
What's the version of mono that, do you need to have, it doesn't seem like
Yeah.
you,
So there's a couple of levels of things.
okay.
And it's just kind of the state of as these projects move forward. For ASP.NET V5 support, you need Mono 4.0.1. And the ASP.NET V5 setup has a homebrew on OS X has a homebrew tap and formula, which will go and pull that down for you. If you're not doing ASP.NET V5 applications, you don't need Mono 4.0.1. If you want to do Node debugging, we need Mono 4.10 or 12. I mean, no, 3.10 Mono.
3.10. Yes.
I think,
3.10.
but here's the question, like, do you need mono at all just
No.
to do text editing?
No.
You just need
No.
mono for the language services,
You
right?
need Mono to do Node debugging, and you need Mono to do ASP.NET V5 apps.
So to finish up, where can people go right now to download and learn more about Visual Studio? I think I have the website up here because I was so excited about it.
Code.visualstudio.com. And how long does it take you?
I think I did it live and it took me like 60 to 90 seconds. It was so fast. Usually I'm like, I'm installing something substantial, I'm going to go get something to drink. But this was just really, really fast.
Cool.
So what are you most excited about this going forward?
Well, so far, now we made it to #1 on Hacker News this
Yeah,
morning, which
very
was
exciting.
pretty exciting, right? So, which is not something that you do that much. And also the feedback is varied, but so you get some appreciation.
I'm excited about it. Hopefully you guys are excited about it. Please take a download of it, spend the 2 minutes doing it, and we're out. We'll see you next time.